latest updates from the SCO Summit. Stay tuned with me on NewsX.
All right, that was my colleague Megha Sharma reporting from the media center where the SCO Summit is being held. Remember, this is the largest SCO Summit ever, hosting leaders including Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Russian President Vladimir Putin, along with other leaders, as Megha pointed out, from Turkey, from the Central Asian countries as well. It is the 25th anniversary of the SCO as it meets amid sharp global conflicts, and as tensions exist within the grouping itself, leaders are expected to focus on strengthening cooperation in security, energy, tackling digital threats as well, while positioning the bloc as a counterweight to Western alliances. Meanwhile, joining us on the broadcast are a host of very special guests. We have with us Venus Upadhyay, who is a senior journalist from Taipei in Taiwan. We have Mark Sutherland, a geopolitical commentator, joining us from London in the UK. We have Dr. Ajay Dua, former Secretary of the Commerce Ministry, joining us from New Delhi in India. My colleague Megha had pointed to the bilateral meeting that has taken place between Xi Jinping and Narendra Modi that just concluded a while back. And on this note, I'd like to go across to Dr. Ajay Dua. India and China that have been rivals for long in Asia, they're looking at enhancing trade. China is already India's second largest economic partner as far as the exchange of goods and services is concerned. Yes, trade was adversely impacted earlier, especially in the aftermath of the 2020 Galwan clashes, but now both countries have agreed to resume a border trade through the Lipu Lake, through Nathula, as well as Shipkila passes. India is eyeing access to Chinese rare earths, and China is also eyeing greater market access into India. All in all, it seems that the second largest and the fourth largest economies in the world are now putting up a joint front against US President Donald Trump and his steep tariffs. So what are the implications of this for global markets?
Thank you, Priya. Priya, as you know, the Indian trade with China has been increasing multifold even after our dispute with China in 2020, what's called now as the Galwan incident, though it was across the border, right up to Bhutan border. If you dissect the trade, it is our imports which have been increasing. We have $114 billion of imports, even after saying that we are not going to be trading with China, or we don't like dealing with China. And our exports, on the other hand, have come down drastically to just $14 billion. So $100 billion of trade deficit with China is what we have before us. And if you look at it, the Indian dependence on China is of critical materials. So a couple of them got addressed when the Chinese foreign minister visited India last week and called on the Prime Minister and handed him over President Xi's invitation to visit China. They include rare earths. They included also certain tunnel boring machines which had not been given to India, and our project in the high-speed rail project with the Japanese aid was getting delayed, and also certain fertilizers, diammonium phosphate. The Chinese said that we don't have enough, but yet they continue to feed both Pakistan as well as Bangladesh. They didn't have enough for us. So those choking points, as I call them, have probably been lifted or promised to be lifted. But what we are looking forward, if it is that our imports to China will fall down, imports from China will fall down drastically, it may not happen without our exports being hit. You know, we are talking of $20 billion of smartphones exports from India. Yes, but 10 billion are components coming from China. We are exporting about $8 to $9 billion of generic medicines, drugs to the US. Our dependence for APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients upon China continues to be huge. A simple thing like an antibiotic called erythromycin, we take it so freely in India, probably more freely than we should be, but 98% of it comes from China. So we have to be kind of getting to an even keel, which is what I'm trying to emphasize, that in the medium term, long term, Make in India might help us to move to getting some of the things which are not resource based. If we don't have rare earths, we don't have, unless we do uh, form other, locate other sources and ally with them, like China did, and it's reached this happy position of controlling the magnet market of the world. The point I'm just trying to make is that this meeting between President Xi and Mr. Modi is a very desirable one, first one in the last 7 years. And I do hope that it will be agreed. And that, I think, is the basic point, that not just merely disengagement at the border, which has just about started, even though it was agreed to last October when President Xi and Prime Minister Modi had met at Kazan. But it's taken time, and it's yet to be done across all the points, the flashpoints. But more important, mechanism is set up to expedite this resolution of the long pending border dispute.
Yes.
We fought a war on it 62, 63 years ago, and it is a war which the Chinese started and continue to tell us that it was a justified war because they do not agree to what's called the McMahon line dividing the border between China and us. They say they were forced in 1913. So that's when the line was drawn. So the point I'm just trying to make is the major issue with China, and thereafter we would see incremental increase in trade with China is what we should be expecting, not an earth-shaking kind of trade or investments flowing from China. Yes, the Chinese have said, we'll invest more if you relax all the FDI restrictions you put on the neighboring countries around you, basically aimed at China. And they've identified renewable energy and auto component industries. They do see merit in being able to supply India. First, any country would see whether it benefits them or not, then look at us. And least of all, when they are not the most friendly country, they like to prop up China Pakistan at a drop of a hat. They like to deal now with Nepal. They like to deal with Bangladesh, as was mentioned by Megha. All that will continue, but I do hope that the basic dispute starts getting addressed. Thereafter, you would see relationship between the two countries, economic relationship, both in investments as well as trade, building up gradually.
All right, sir. I'd like to take one of the points that you had made regarding Chinese aggression on the Indian border forward with Ms. Venus Upadhyay. It's not just the Indian border, it's also in the South China Sea that we've witnessed Chinese military aggression take place. Just in July, in fact, there were 58 Chinese aircrafts, 9 Chinese naval vessels and 1 official ship that was inside Taiwanese territorial waters. Of the 58 sorties, 45 of them had crossed the median line and entered the airspace around Taiwan. So what are the concerns that Taiwan at large has at this point, especially if you see ever since US and India ties have taken a dip, it seems that Quad 2 is not as energized as it was before, though we've seen statements from Japan and Australia recently come in. There have been reports from publications in the United States of America, such as the New York Times, that hint that Trump might not fly down to New Delhi for the Quad Summit this year.
I think in Taiwan, the general emotion is that they're watching. In the newspapers of last 2 days have been mostly talking about India's independent stand, and including there is editorial in the Taipei Times today which is just on India and India's stand in the current context of the trade ties, of the trade and tariffs by US and Prime Minister Modi's trip to Japan as well as to China. So that I think what the Taiwanese are trying to say is that India is taking an independent stand. What India is doing right now is governed by India's interest. And the issue of Chinese aggression in the South China Sea, I think that is not something that has just developed this year, that has been happening for many years, whether it's South China Sea or it's East China Sea, or whether it is Chinese activities on the Indian border. We must remember that military disengagement has happened, but that doesn't mean that the militaries are withdrawn from the border. So, the realism is very dynamic. It's very multifaceted. And I think both the Chinese and the Indian sides are very grounded in reality. Both the sides are very grounded in their own interest. I want to particularly mention the statements that have come out of the meeting that has concluded today between Prime Minister Modi and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Particularly the statement of Chinese leader Xi Jinping. He said, "We must also step up to our historic responsibilities to uphold multilateralism, a multipolar world, and more democracy in international institutions, and work together for peace and prosperity in Asia and around the world." So I think this statement coming from Xi Jinping itself shows that China is actually assuming the leadership of the global South, because when it comes to China's dealing with the US, it is, always dealing from that bipolar perspective. But when it comes to China assuming the leadership of rest of the world, of the global South, China has now started to talk about democratic institutions. China has started to talk about multilateralism. And when you look at what Chinese leader talked about India, in the statement that has just released, he's actually talked about friendship being a good choice. He's used the word the choice and friendship. Whereas if you look at the Indian side, the words that are emphasized are mutual trust, respect and sensitivity, and peace and stability. So I think you look at both the sides, and the statements from both the sides, they basically reflect the interest of both the sides. So I think if we are grounded in realism, we would not jump to kind of massive conclusions and say that, like something great is happening in India and China relationship. I think the relationship is very grounded in reality, and geopolitics is constantly changing. And in the current context, which I think is, very time bound, we are engaging with the Chinese side, which is in our interest, and they are engaging with us, which is in our interest.
All right, ma'am. I'd like to take this conversation forward with Mr. Mark Sutherland joining us from London. Thank you so much for your patience as we listened in to other panelists as well. I'd like to ask you about the SCO at large. The SCO as an organization, its relevance has been often questioned over the years. There are differences between India and China in particular that is often used as a point by critics. However, there have been some key developments over the last couple of months. The US is adopting a more protectionist stance as far as its economy is concerned. Trump is slapping steep tariffs against countries across the world. India and China reached a border truce in October 2024. So in this context, are we seeing the organization coming up as a counterweight to Western alliances, or is it still not quite there yet?
Good to be with you, and good to be with your guests. Pia, it is growing. Yes, the idea is to be a complete counterweight. That would be what they would want to actually achieve. And as has been already said by a wonderful guest, this is the 25th, and this is the largest meeting within the context of, as people would say, a disruption within a geopolitical order and what people would like to then bring about. I'd like to just come back to a little bit of history. It's rather interesting to me that the Chinese are using the word democracy from a communist technocratic point of view. That's sort of stuck in the back of my throat, if I must be honest with you. And it's rather interesting when we go back all those years in the 70s to when Nixon and Henry Kissinger then go over to China to open up relations with them. But this is important. This also has to be held in context that many businesses and many, of course, American companies have then transferred thousands of factories, manufacturing facilities over to China because it's always been seen as the cheapest labor market within the world to then grow. It's then become, my opinion, this whole technocratic society. So let's just hold that in context. That when within the West, you have then fired up China within its ideology. We haven't got time to go through history of Mao and all the rest, but let's just bear that in context. Now you have, as your reporters wonderfully pointed out, 24, 25 leaders, number of countries on the ground were certainly fully aware of the geopolitical interactions that are going on. For President Trump, it is about getting manufacturing back into America because he has thought there is far too many factories and companies that have gone out there. If you look at where, for argument's sake, Apple actually manufactures its phones, etc., and then they are shipped back to America. So he has seen jobs for many, many years go in that direction, as well as go over the Mexican border, thanks to NAFTA and GAFTA, etc. Why am I saying all this? Because history is important to be where we are. There is a multipolar challenge. That's what the hegemony is about. There is the whole thing of the dollar. Remember, the dollar is the world currency, of course, dealing with oil, etc. But the BRICS countries, this conference wishes to fundamentally undermine that. If you are moving to a point where you've got 20 to 40% of the BRICS countries saying, right, we want to de-dollarize, we want to create that kind of environment with gold back. This is not a conspiracy. If you look for many years, and you can see what's going on. Plus, President Trump is mindful that there is an American, we're looking at 30 trillion in debt, and I totally note the point that the Donald has made by saying we're signing up to 10 trillion's worth of deals. All of these held have to be held in mind because people want to get rid of the American hegemony on the world. That's what they want to do, whether they are doing that by causing chaos politically within America or outside. And that is why Donald Trump has then unleashed the tariff wars, because he passionately believes that it is not fair to America. And as he said, I'm putting America first. And that is what is going on. Now, whether this will work, whether it's deemed as unfair, etc., of course, is totally and utterly understandable. But from his point of view, he has turned around and said, well, I'm the only president that in recent memory is actually going to address this, because in his own mind, he's turning around and saying, I have a business brain, I'm going to address this. You cannot keep buying more goods from other countries and keep importing them when you're turning around and going, what is this how is this damaging our manufacturing base within America? And going back to your question, you're right. The SCO, it is being seen as a body which to then challenge that hegemony. And this is what we have to hold into consideration all the time. And I know what your wonderful guests are saying, in the fact that it's extremely important that people have discussion face to face when you are raising the border war from historically many years ago, but also recently with what happened in 2020. At the end of the day, it's good that people are actually sitting down and having conversations, but people ought to be also aware of what China has been doing and what they want to do, the Silk Road. And as Venus is pointing out, that recently with what's been going on in the South China Sea is not just something that's happened, last week. This has been going on many, many years. And of course, then the threat, and when you're having exercises around Taiwan, that is also another threat. This has been going on, as I say, without underlining it, a long, long time. And it is, in many ways, it isn't just an instant answer. We need to broaden this out over many years. But thank you, Pia.
Indeed, I request Mr. Sutherland to stay on with us. I would like to thank Ms. Venus Upadhyay as well as Dr. Ajay Dua